Okay, so have you ever felt like you just needed to put up some walls around you? Like you built up this whole fortress and you're safe inside?
Oh, absolutely. It's a natural human instinct to want to protect ourselves, right? To feel safe and in control, especially when things feel uncertain.
Exactly. And it's easy to fall into that trap of thinking that boundaries, like those walls we build, equal safety and control.
Right. And it's not always a bad thing, those boundaries. Sometimes we need them, But it's about finding that balance.
This guide we're diving into today calls it flexible firmness. It's like you have your core values, those non-negotiable.
Exactly. Those are your guiding principles. And it's not about being rigid, but knowing what you stand for.
Okay, so that makes sense. But then how do you tell the difference between discomfort that's telling you, like, hey, you need a boundary here, versus discomfort that's actually a good thing, like a growing pain?
That's where that internal compass comes in, that gut feeling that tells you something's off.
So it's about tuning into that inner voice, that intuition.
Absolutely. It's about learning to trust yourself, to know when something feels truly misaligned with who you are and what you believe in.
And that's where those boundaries come in, right? Like, if something's truly jeopardizing those core values, those are the times to stand firm.
Exactly. But then there are those other times when the discomfort might actually be a sign of growth.
You mean like those situations that push us outside our comfort zones, but in a good way?
Exactly. It's not always easy to tell the difference in the moment, though, right?
Right. So how do we do that? How do we figure out when to hold firm and when to be flexible?
Well, the guide talks about this idea of controlled exposure, and I think it's a really helpful way to think about it.
Controlled exposure. What does that even mean?
It's like instead of jumping headfirst into the deep end of the pool, you dip your toes in first, you test the waters.
Okay, so it's about taking baby steps, easing ourselves into those uncomfortable situations rather than diving headfirst.
Precisely. You start small, reflect on what you learn, and gradually build up your resilience.
So you don't have to go from 0 to 60 overnight. You can take your time.
Exactly. And this is where self-compassion becomes so important. Be kind to yourself, especially when you stumble or things don't go as planned.
Because let's be real, when we're pushing our boundaries, stepping outside of our comfort zones, we're bound to make mistakes, right?
Absolutely. And that's okay. Mistakes are proof that you're trying, that you're growing.
It's like that saying, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs.
Exactly. Mistakes are just opportunities to learn and do better next time.
The guide also talks about this idea of reframing uncomfortable experiences. What does that look like in practice?
Instead of viewing discomfort as something negative, try to see it as an opportunity for growth. Ask yourself, what can I learn from this situation? What new skill might I gain from this challenge?
So it's about shifting our perspective, seeing those challenges as chances to learn and grow rather than obstacles to avoid.
Precisely. It's a subtle shift in mindset, but it can make a world of difference in how we approach those uncomfortable situations.
This all sounds good in theory, but when you're in the thick of it, feeling that discomfort, it can be tough to remember all this stuff. What are some practical things people can do in those moments when they feel themselves like retreating, wanting to build those walls back up?
That's where mindfulness and emotional regulation come in handy. Taking a moment to pause, breathe, and just observe your emotions can be incredibly powerful.
So instead of getting swept away by those feelings of discomfort or anxiety,
Yeah.
we can learn to ride the wave.
Exactly. And there are some simple yet surprisingly effective techniques you can use in those moments.
So what are those techniques? Like what can someone actually do in those moments to kind of, I don't know, regain control?
Well, you know how we were just talking about taking a moment to pause? One of the best things you can do is seriously just breathe.
Just breathe, like we already do naturally.
Right, but intentionally. When you feel that urge to retreat, to build those walls back up, just take a few really slow, deep breaths and just focus on it.
Focus on it. Like, what am I supposed to be like envisioning my lungs filling up or something?
You can, but really it's more about noticing the feeling of your breath. Like how it feels cool going in and warm going out, or how your chest rises and falls. It's really grounding, you know?
Okay, yeah, I can see how that would be helpful, like a little mini meditation break in the middle of, well, life.
Exactly. And the guide also mentions grounding yourself using your senses. It's a pretty classic mindfulness technique, but it really works.
So, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, smell the coffee brewing or something?
Well, that would work, but really it's about consciously tuning into each of your senses. Like, what do you see around you right now? What do you hear? What can you smell?
And that helps ground you. Like, how?
It brings your attention back to the present moment, to what's actually happening around you rather than getting lost in your thoughts. And speaking of thoughts, the guide emphasizes this other technique that's so simple but super effective.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Sometimes just naming the emotion you're feeling can be surprisingly powerful.
What, like just saying, I'm angry or I'm scared out loud?
Yeah, or even just to yourself, like, okay, I'm feeling really anxious right now. It's like by acknowledging the emotion, you're kind of taking away its power a bit.
Interesting. It sounds almost too simple, but I guess sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones, right?
Exactly. And like any skill, it takes practice. The more you do it, the easier it becomes to notice those emotions as they come up and kind of choose how you want to respond to them.
So it's about becoming more aware of those patterns, those emotional habits we fall into.
Exactly. Like, when do you tend to build those walls up the highest? What are your triggers?
And once we know what those triggers are, then we can start to make different choices, right?
Precisely. Instead of just reacting automatically, we can pause, breathe, and decide how we want to respond.
So it's not about like never having boundaries or never feeling those uncomfortable emotions. It's about, like you said, finding that balance.
Exactly. It's about learning to differentiate between those boundaries that are truly protecting you and those that are actually holding you back.
So it's like sometimes those boundaries, those walls we think are protecting us, they can actually end up trapping us.
Yeah, it's a fine line, isn't it? We all crave that sense of security, but we don't want to cut ourselves off from growth and connection in the process.
It's like that saying, the magic happens outside your comfort zone.
So true. It's when we push past those self-imposed limits that we discover new possibilities, new strengths that we didn't even know we had.
You mentioned earlier that this whole process of finding that balance, that flexible firmness, it's a journey, not a destination. So how do we actually stay the course? How do we make this a habit, something we just do naturally?
Well, like with anything worthwhile, it takes practice. It's about cultivating that self-awareness, those little alarm bells that go off when those walls are starting to creep up.
And then making a conscious choice about how we respond.
Exactly. Asking yourself, okay, is this boundary really serving me right now, or am I just clinging to control, avoiding something potentially good?
And if we realize that we are, in fact, clinging to control or dodging discomfort, we shouldn't beat ourselves up about it, right?
Absolutely not. That's where the self-compassion comes in. It's about recognizing those patterns without judgment,
Yeah.
just being kind to ourselves. We're all works in progress, right?
Totally. So it's okay to stumble, to fall back into old habits, as long as we get back up and keep trying.
Exactly. It's about progress, not perfection. And as you continue to practice this flexible firmness, you'll find those tricky situations become a little bit easier to navigate.
It's like we're building a muscle, that adaptability muscle.
Yes. And just like any muscle, the more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Love that analogy. So, to wrap things up, for our listeners out there, it's okay to have boundaries, to want to feel safe and secure, but just make sure those walls you've built aren't turning into a prison.
Exactly. Be open to the idea that maybe, just maybe, discomfort can lead to something amazing. That learning to be flexible can actually be really freeing. And sometimes the most incredible transformations happen when we step outside those comfort zones and embrace the unknown.
You've got this.